Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's pretty central to, I think, every educator's heart. It's about creating a classroom that actually genuinely works for each and every student. So we're going to dive deep into the world of differentiated instruction. And our guide for this journey is going to be Carol Ann Tomlinson's book, The Differentiated Classroom, Responding to the Needs of All Learners.
It's such a fascinating topic, and one that's even more relevant now than ever, I think, just given all the diverse needs that we see in today's classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a differentiated classroom? We hear this term tossed around a lot, but what's it actually look like when you walk into a classroom?
Well, it's a big shift away from that old one-size-fits-all model that many of us kind of grew up with in school, right? A differentiated classroom, it starts by acknowledging that, all learners are different. They come with different strengths and interests and ways of learning, and the real magic happens when teachers take that knowledge and use it to tailor their instruction. How they teach, what they teach, even how students show what they've learned. All of that can be adjusted to create the best possible learning environment for each and every student.
So it's less about everyone learning the same thing at the same pace and more about acknowledging that everyone is on their own individual growth path.
Exactly. It's recognizing that learning is a very personalized journey, and each student's going to progress at their own pace and in their own way.
Tomlinson makes a really interesting point in her book about how traditional classrooms, even when teachers have the best intentions, sometimes they can leave both the struggling learners and the advanced learners behind. Have you seen that play out in real life?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. In a traditional classroom, you might have a student who's already mastered the material sitting right next to a student who's struggling to keep up. And the student who's ahead, they get bored, while the one who's behind can start to feel lost and discouraged. Differentiation is all about addressing that imbalance, making sure that every student is appropriately challenged.
It's like everyone's running a different race, so judging them by the same finish line doesn't really make
That's
sense.
such a great analogy. And Tomlinson, actually, she gives this really great example in her book. She asks you to imagine a class studying the Industrial Revolution, and everyone's reading the same textbook. Like, how boring would that be? Not exactly the most engaging way to learn about such a pivotal moment in history.
Yeah, and probably not very effective either. Who really remembers information they're just passively absorbing?
Exactly. But now imagine that same classroom where students are learning about the Industrial Revolution through a variety of activities. Each one is tailored to their individual needs and interests. Maybe some students are creating like mock news reports, connecting events from the Industrial Revolution to today's headlines. Some are building models to demonstrate the amazing engineering feats of the time. Others might be researching the social impact of industrialization or composing songs, creating artwork inspired by that era. The key here is that everyone is learning, but they're learning in a way that really clicks for them. It allows them to really showcase their unique strengths.
That image of the Industrial Revolution classroom just coming to life through all those different activities, that's powerful. So in a nutshell, it sounds like differentiated instruction is about choice, flexibility, and really personalized learning experiences. But let's unpack the how of differentiation a little further. Tomlinson highlights these three key elements: readiness, interest, and learning profile. Can you kind of break those down for us?
Of course, let's start with readiness. This basically refers to a student's their existing knowledge and skill level, related to whatever you're teaching. So it's figuring out where each learner is starting so you can adjust the complexity and the support accordingly. We've all been in those classes where material felt way too easy, and it's incredibly frustrating to feel like you're not being challenged. Differentiation aims to avoid that by making sure every student is working at a level that stretches their abilities but doesn't overwhelm them.
So finding that sweet spot between boredom and frustration.
Yeah, exactly. Now, interest is all about tapping into what really makes students tick, what they're genuinely curious about. And here's the cool part. It doesn't always have to be directly tied to the subject matter. Tomlinson talks about incorporating student interests through these things called orbital studies, which are basically like independent projects that allow students to connect what they're learning in class to their own passions.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Can you give us an example of how that might work? Let's say we have a student who's obsessed with video games. How could you connect that to, oh, I don't know, a unit on ancient civilizations?
Oh, that's great. So you could challenge that student to research and compare the city building strategies they use in their favorite video game to, like, the urban planning techniques of ancient Rome or the incredible infrastructure of the Indus Valley civilization. Or maybe they could even create a presentation or even design their own video game incorporating elements of ancient mythology or historical events.
Wow, that's actually really cool. You're taking something they already love and using it as a springboard for deeper learning.
Exactly. And when students are genuinely passionate about something, they're more likely to dive in, ask those thought-provoking questions, make those connections that lead to real understanding. And finally, we have learning profile, which simply acknowledges that we all learn and process information in different ways. Some of us are visual learners, some auditory, some learn best by doing. A differentiated classroom gives students choices in how they learn and demonstrate their understanding.
So recognizing and honoring those individual learning styles. But wouldn't that create chaos in the classroom? How can a teacher possibly manage all that customization and flexibility?
That's a really common concern, but Tomlinson argues that differentiated instruction is actually the opposite of chaos. While it does take more upfront planning, it ultimately leads to a smoother, more engaged classroom because everyone's working on something that's meaningful to them. She gives a whole range of specific strategies for managing differentiation, and we'll dive into those in a bit.
Well, I am definitely ready to hear about those strategies, but before we get into the nuts and bolts of how to differentiate, I'm curious about your take on why this approach is so important. What are some of the key benefits of differentiated instruction, both for students and for teachers?
That's a great question. I think one of the most significant benefits is that it creates a much more equitable learning environment. When we recognize and respond to those individual needs, we're making sure that all students have the opportunity to succeed, no matter their background, their learning style, their prior knowledge.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really empowering for students who have maybe traditionally struggled in a more one-size-fits-all system.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, it also challenges those students who might be coasting along, not really being pushed to their full potential. So differentiated instruction helps every student grow and learn at a pace that's right for them.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine it's incredibly rewarding for teachers too, right? Seeing their students thrive and engage with learning in this way.
Absolutely. When teachers feel like they're genuinely meeting the needs of all their students, it can be incredibly motivating, incredibly fulfilling. It can even lead to a more positive classroom climate overall.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved. Now let's talk about those strategies. You mentioned that Tomlinson outlined some really specific strategies for managing differentiation. What are a few that stand out to you?
One that I think is really effective is using learning stations.
Okay, I've heard of those. Can you break down how those actually work in a differentiated classroom?
So picture this, your classroom transformed into these like mini learning hubs. Each one is focused on a different aspect of whatever topic you're teaching. Those are your learning stations. Students rotate through them, and at each station, they're engaging with activities that are tailored to their specific learning needs and styles.
So it's not just having different activities. It's about making sure those activities are differentiated for, readiness, interests, learning profile.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. So let's say you're teaching a unit on ecosystems, right? At one station, students might be analyzing data on like local wildlife populations. At another station, maybe they're creating dioramas to represent different biomes. And then at a third station, they could be like researching and debating the impact of human activities on specific ecosystems. The key is that each station offers a different pathway to understanding the same core concept. It lets students learn in a way that really works for them.
That visual of the different stations really helps, and it sounds like a fantastic way to keep students engaged and cater to, all those different learning preferences.
It definitely is. And speaking of engagement, we were talking earlier about those orbital studies that Tomlinson highlights. Those can be a real game changer for tapping into student interests.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by that idea. It's like giving students permission to explore their passions, within the framework of the curriculum. How does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so think of it as like giving students a chance to orbit around the core content. They get to delve into these areas that really spark their curiosity. So let's say you have a student who's super passionate about fashion design, and you're doing a history unit on, I don't know, ancient civilization. Instead of just reading about, clothing styles, they could research the textiles and fashion trends of a particular era. Maybe even design a modern outfit inspired by what they find.
That's such a cool way to bridge their passion with what you're teaching in the classroom. So instead of fashion design feeling like this separate interest, It becomes this like lens through which they can explore history.
Exactly. And that deeper engagement, it often leads to like a much deeper understanding of the subject matter.
Now, this all sounds amazing, but I'm sure there are teachers listening who are thinking, how on earth do I manage all of this? I mean, differentiation is great, but it also sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, I totally get that. It's a valid concern. It does require a different approach to how you manage your classroom. But I think instead of looking at it as chaos, maybe think of it as controlled chaos or like organized complexity.
Okay, I like that. Controlled chaos, definitely something any teacher can relate to. So how do you create that sense of organized complexity? What are some practical tips for teachers?
Well, I think one of the most important things is establishing clear routines and procedures right from the start. Students need to know exactly what's expected of them at each station, how to transition between activities, how to get help when they need it. Having that predictable structure really helps create a sense of order, even if students are working on different things at different paces.
So it's about setting those boundaries, having those clear expectations so that the learning can kind of flow within that structure.
Exactly. And another thing that's really crucial is communication. Be upfront with your students about why you're doing things differently in the classroom. Explain the benefits of this approach and, address any concerns they might have. When students understand the why behind your approach, they're much more likely to buy in and really own their learning.
It's about transparency and building that trust within the classroom community, right?
Absolutely. And don't forget about communicating with parents, too. Keep them in the loop about your differentiated approach, the goals you have, how it benefits their children. Transparency and open communication is key to getting everyone on board.
Now let's talk about that big elephant in the room, time. Teachers are already juggling like a million things. How can they realistically find the time to plan and actually implement differentiated lessons?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But here's the thing. While differentiated instruction might require a bit more upfront work, it can actually save you time in the long run.
That sounds counterintuitive. How so?
Okay, think about it. When students are engaged in work that's challenging and interesting to them, there are fewer distractions, fewer behavior issues to deal with. And when you're not constantly having to reteach material to students who didn't get it the first time around, you actually have more time to provide that individual support to those who need it.
That makes sense. Less time on crowd control, more time for meaningful learning.
Exactly. And there are definitely ways to make the planning process more efficient. Tomlinson talks about like building a resource bank of activities and materials that you can adapt and reuse over time. She also encourages teachers to collaborate with each other, share lesson plans, share ideas, even co-teach lessons to kind of lighten the load.
So working smarter, not harder.
Precisely. And remember, you don't have to do everything all at once. Start small. Choose one strategy that you think would work well and just experiment with it in your classroom. See what works, what doesn't, and make adjustments from there.
That's great advice. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start small, experiment, celebrate those small wins along the way.
Well said. Now, with all this talk about learning activities and classroom management, it brings us to another really crucial aspect of differentiated instruction. Assessment. How do you actually measure student learning when everyone is working on different things at different paces?
Yeah, that's a really important question because, I mean, if the goal is to meet students where they are and help them grow, it seems like those traditional tests and quizzes might not always be the most effective way to, figure out how they're doing.
You're absolutely right. A one-size-fits-all approach to assessment, it just doesn't really align with the principles of differentiation. We need assessment methods that are just as diverse as the learners themselves. Approaches that give us, a more holistic view of how students are growing and what they understand.
Okay, so what are some of those alternative assessment methods that work well when you're differentiating instruction?
Tomlinson talks about several really powerful strategies, things like observations, student portfolios, project-based assessments, and even getting students to reflect on their own learning. Each of these gives you a slightly different, window into the learning process.
Okay, so let's dive into those a bit. Starting with observations, how can teachers effectively use those to assess student learning in a differentiated classroom?
Well, think of observations as like having a front row seat to how learning is actually happening. Instead of just, grading the final product, you're watching how students engage with the material, how they interact with each other, how they approach challenges.
So it's about gathering those real-time insights into how they're thinking, how they solve problems, how they make connections.
Exactly. And because you're seeing them in their natural learning environment, you're getting a much more authentic picture of their understanding than you might get from like a traditional test.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like you become this learning detective, right? You're picking up on all those subtle cues that reveal how each student is, making sense of things.
I love that analogy. And the great thing about observations is you can do them anytime, anywhere, during group work, independent study, even those little moments between activities.
It's about being present and really paying attention. Those little moments of insight can be so revealing.
Oh, they absolutely can. And when you combine those observations with other assessment methods, you start to build this like really rich picture of each student's learning journey.
Speaking of which, let's talk about student portfolios. Where do those fit into this whole differentiated assessment thing?
Portfolios are such a powerful way for students to like showcase how their learning is progressing over time. It's not just about, sticking a bunch of assignments in a folder. It's about curating a collection of their work that really demonstrates growth, their unique strengths, their individual learning journey.
Yeah, and I bet that's empowering for students, right? It gives them a sense of ownership over their learning and a way to see how far they've come.
Absolutely. And even the process of like choosing what goes in their portfolio can be super valuable. It encourages them to think critically about their work, see where they need to grow, set goals for the future.
It's like assessment becomes this reflective process instead of just a judgment.
Exactly. When students are actively involved in how their learning is assessed, they're much more likely to own it and to, really strive for continuous improvement.
Now let's talk about project-based assessments. I feel like those are particularly well suited to a differentiated classroom.
Oh, absolutely. Project-based assessments let students apply what they know and what they can do in a more real-world kind of context. They encourage creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, all those essential 21st century skills, right?
And because projects are often so open-ended, they naturally lend themselves to differentiation, don't they?
Precisely. You can design projects with multiple entry points so students can choose topics they're interested in, approaches that play to their strengths, products that really showcase their unique talents. Imagine, for example, a unit on the American Revolution, right? Some students might choose to write historical fiction, others might create documentaries, some might build models of key battles, and others might even write and perform songs inspired by that time period.
Wow, so much room for student choice and creativity all within the same project.
Exactly. And what you're assessing goes way beyond just, facts and figures. You're seeing how well they can think critically, solve problems, work together, and communicate their ideas effectively.
So you're evaluating the whole student, not just their ability to, memorize information.
Exactly. Now, in addition to observations, portfolios, and project-based assessments, Tomlinson is a big advocate for student self-reflection. It's so important.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially in a differentiated classroom where everyone's working at their own pace, maybe on slightly different tasks. How can teachers build that self-reflection piece into their classroom culture?
There are tons of creative ways to do it. You could have students keep learning logs, write weekly reflections, do self-assessment activities, or even have regular one-on-one conferences where you talk about their progress and what their goals are.
Those all sound really useful. And it seems like self-reflection isn't just beneficial for students, it can be really helpful for teachers too, right?
Absolutely. When we encourage students to reflect on their own learning, we actually gain valuable insights into how our teaching is landing, what's working, what might need tweaking. It's a feedback loop that benefits everyone.
It's like everyone's learning and growing together.
It really is. Now, before we wrap things up, I'd love to touch on something we haven't really talked about directly, the role of technology in all of this. How can technology support differentiated instruction?
Yeah, that's a great point. Technology seems like it could be a real game changer when it comes to personalizing learning.
Absolutely. Think about things like online platforms that offer personalized learning paths, or adaptive software that adjusts to a student's skill level. Virtual reality simulations can create these super immersive learning experiences. And even simple tools like audiobooks or closed captioning can make content accessible to a wider range of learners.
Wow, so many possibilities. And it seems like technology can also help teachers with all the, logistical challenges of differentiation.
For sure. Digital tools can make it so much easier to create and share differentiated materials, track student progress, give feedback, communicate with parents. It frees up time for teachers to focus on those human connections that make learning so powerful.
So technology as a facilitator, not a replacement for the human element.
That's exactly it. And as technology keeps evolving, the possibilities for differentiation are just going to keep expanding.
It's an exciting time to be an educator, that's for sure. And while technology can definitely enhance differentiated instruction, it's important to remember it's not a magic solution on its own. At its core, differentiation is really about a teacher's deep understanding of their students, their commitment to creating a responsive learning environment, their willingness to embrace the beautiful complexity of how learning happens.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Technology is a tool, a powerful tool, but it's the human connection, the teacher's expertise and passion that really bring differentiated instruction to life.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking conversation about differentiation. I know our listeners are walking away with tons of insights and practical strategies to try in their classrooms.
I hope so. I'm always so excited to talk about this topic, and I really believe differentiated instruction has the power to, transform the learning experience for every student.
Well, for those listening who want to learn more, we highly recommend Carol Ann Tomlinson's book, The Differentiated Classroom. It's full of practical advice and inspiring examples, and it was really the foundation for our conversation today.
It's a fantastic resource, and I encourage every educator to check it out.
A huge thank you to you for joining us today and sharing your expertise and passion for this topic.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into a topic that's shaping the future of education.